Live before we start our
live.
Oh, wait, never mind, we're live.
The only thing else.
I'm going to pass the microphone to you in a minute, Representative.
Okay, go for it. Go for
Good
it.
morning. It is Thursday, January 19th, and we are here in a joint hearing with the Human Services Committee upstairs. This is General Housing. And today is Homelessness Awareness Day, and we have a list of witnesses are going to come in, and part of our process, part of our acknowledgement of Homelessness Awareness Days is to appreciate the fact that no matter what we've been doing pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, it's still not enough as long as there are people who do not have homes. And today is a day for us to reflect on that, to hear from not only advocates, but from people who are working on alleviating this issue. And this is an issue that crosses the line between our committee and Human Services. And so, again, traditionally, when we had a room 11 to be in, we would be all lined up on a table. But here we are in the new world, half of us in person and half of us on Zoom, but we're all in the same place. And so I want to thank the committees for getting together, and I want to thank everybody who's going to testify in advance, because it's going to be a quick morning listening. And you'll let us know at some point during the testimony about what will be happening at noon out on the front steps. I would appreciate that. But I would also like to just take a minute to introduce ourselves to our witnesses. And I'll start with this room, and then I'm going to pass the microphone to Representative Wood, because again, her committee oversees the budget for a lot of these programmings, and I would like to hear from her as well as a co-chair. Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Representative Kathleen James, Bennington 4 District.
Joe Parsons, Newbury, Thompson, and Groton.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, and most of Georgia.
Dennis LaBounty, Caledonia 3.
Elizabeth Burrows, Heartland, West Windsor, Windsor.
Larry Labor, Orleans, Essex, District 1.
Mary Howard, Rutland, District 6.
Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Rutland, Bennington District.
Representative Wood, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Representative Stevens. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate how much effort it takes to have people come to the State House and to share their stories with us, and we appreciate it very much. And I'm just going to do the same. We'll do a quick around the room. My name is Teresa Wood. I'm from Waterbury, and I also represent Bolton, Buell, and Huntington.
Hi, I'm Jessica Brumstead, and I represent Shelburne and St. George.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Taylor Small, and I represent Winooski.
Good morning, Ray Garofano. I represent Essex and Essex Junction.
Good morning, Representative Noah Hyman of Williston and South Burlington.
Representative Kelly Piella from Londonderry, also representing Andover, Weston, and Winhall.
Representative Jubilee McGill. I represent Bridport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
Good morning. I'm Dan Noyes. I represent Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Thank you. And feel free to take it away, Representative Stevens.
Thank you. As you can see, we represent all corners of the state, and we all have the experience, I think, of knowing family members and friends who are affected or are experiencing homelessness or threatened by it. And so I again appreciate the time. I have a list of witnesses here. We're going to start with Sarah Phillips, who is the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. And it's good to see you with 3D after these several years. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. It's good to be back. So for the record, Sarah Phillips, I'm the director of the State Office of Economic Opportunity, which is part of the Department of Children and Families and the Agency of Human Services. I have the task today of providing some foundation for the conversations and folks you'll hear from later today. So a lot of information to share. I have packed a lot of information into slides. I'm going to try and touch on a lot, but a lot of it I won't go into detail on. And as Representative Stevens, Chair Stevens said, I'm happy to come back and dig deeper into any of the topic areas with any of you. So let me dive right in. So homeless assistance, that's what I'm here to give you an overview of how it works in Vermont. It can feel very confusing. It's a variety of state programs and resources that we devote towards homeless assistance. I've listed some of them here. Of course, at AHS, we have a variety of other housing work that we do that isn't specifically focused on homelessness, right? Like reentry housing or recovery housing. There's also a lot of different structures and processes around homeless assistance. There's a lot of state funding, but there's federal funding is an important part of the mix. We have a Vermont Council on Homelessness, which is our interagency council that is really meant to be responsible for developing a shared vision and a plan on how we solve homelessness in Vermont. We have the Continuums of Care. I'll talk about them in a moment. You might hear the word coordinated entry tossed around today, so I'm going to just briefly talk about that. And then you'll probably hear talk about HMIS. Chair Stevens already mentioned the point in time count. HMIS is the management system that we use, the data management system all of our partners use around homelessness, and point in time counts another important way that we know about who's homeless in Vermont. So Vermont's Homeless Continuums of Care, we have two. This is really important to mention them. They're hosting Homelessness Awareness Day today, right? Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness and the Chittenden Homeless Alliance. Those are two HUD jurisdiction continuums of care under the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness. That's actually an umbrella organization that has 11 local homeless coalitions that are a part of that. It's really important to mention the continuums of care. They play a really important role, not just in terms of administering federal funding, but also this is where we come together, not just homeless shelter and service providers, but also state government, local government, all of the different parties involved that want to work on addressing and solving homelessness within a community. This is where they come together to identify gaps and to work together. One of the really important things that the continuums of care do is they oversee the point in time count. So this is last year's point in time count. Again, this year's point in time count will happen next week. This is a one-night census count about who's experiencing homelessness in Vermont. This uses a very sort of narrow definition, but it is the federal and the state definition of homelessness. Literal homelessness, people who are sheltered in emergency housing paid for by a public agency or nonprofit, and then also people who are unsheltered. I think there's limitations to this data, but one of the really important things it does is it paints a picture, right, of who's homeless in Vermont. Too often, we think about homelessness and who's homeless as we have a particular image in our head, but actually it's a really diverse group of people. And so again, I'm not going to read this slide, but I want you to see some of the things, right? 17% of people experiencing homelessness are kids, 10% fleeing domestic violence, right? If you think about families are a huge portion of who's homeless. And in fact, a quarter of all families experiencing homelessness are headed by a parenting youth, right? That's someone 24 or younger. So we have a lot of different people in Vermont experiencing homelessness, and that's an important part of how we have to think about solving it, because there's no one solution. The other important part of the point in time count is that it gives us some trends over time, right? So this is looking statewide, 2,700, almost 2,800 people, right? Again, it's, if you look back at this slide, a little over 2,000 households experiencing homelessness in 2022. We saw that jump up in 2021, right? That was a pandemic. So let's just talk a little bit about how we got here. Actually, let me talk about where we're at right now. So this is based on Monday's data. Right now, who's homeless in Vermont? Most people homeless in Vermont are in what's called the DCF Transitional Housing Program. These are folks who have occupancy agreements in hotels, 1,300 households, right? We think about homelessness in terms of households because a household lives in a home, right? So that's the data, right? So 1,300 households. We have almost another 500 households in just the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program with the motel voucher. We have a broad network of emergency shelters across the state, a lot of different models on how we provide emergency shelter in communities. That's about another 500 households. And then we know just based on some unofficial counts in communities over the winter that there's at least 150 people in Vermont who are unsheltered. So this is about 2,400 households currently unsheltered currently homeless this week. So how did we get here? Just a little backup, because I know a lot of folks are new. But prior to COVID, on any given night, we might have 200 to 300 households in a motel, right? I just showed you some numbers that are much, much bigger than that. And we used to think about our emergency housing response being split between community-based system of care and overflow into motels, right? And it was about half and half And right now, most people are in hotels. And part of that's because it was a really important part of our COVID response in those early days. We expanded the motel voucher program to be able to provide non-congregate shelter to meet the needs of people during the early days of COVID, right? We expanded that. We also saw some crazy stuff happening in our housing market, and we saw the pandemic exacerbated the housing crisis. We did some other important things during COVID. That wasn't the only part of our homeless response. We did a lot of work to reinforce our shelter network. We created alternative isolation quarantine housing. That pandemic response, that expanded emergency housing program, that ended last summer. And in July, we launched what's called the DCF Transitional Housing Program, supported by federal emergency rental assistance funds. That program currently is where most people are participating in this program if they're in a hotel or motel. They have an occupancy agreement. Like I said, this program is planned to end at the end of March 2023. So that takes us back to what is our emergency shelter, our emergency housing capacity, right? So we're back to that pre-COVID piece where we have these two pieces, an emergency shelter network. Right now is about 28 different emergency shelters, congregate, semi-congregate, non-congregate, lots of different models. We also use emergency apartments for families as a best practice. And then we have a lot of domestic violence shelters that when I say we, I'm broadly, it's a collective we. I hope you know that, not just we, OEO, I should say that. So we also work with our domestic violence shelters, place folks in motels when their shelters are full. Right now, our capacity in that network is a little over 500 households. Only 22 of those beds are seasonal. So I put that in context because pre-COVID, we may have had more household capacity, but a huge chunk of that, as you can see, was seasonal capacity. And I even put in there for you in May 2020, right, the sort of early days of the pandemic, we were down to being only able to serve about 160 households in motels. The other piece is the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, and that's back to its pre-COVID rules. Right now, we're in the middle of something called adverse weather conditions, which means it has expanded eligibility for people during cold weather months. We did some really important things, and preserving and expanding emergency shelters and that network is a really important strategy of the state of Vermont. We've made major significant new investments thanks to you all and the legislature for appropriating additional funds to base funding for shelters. We've also supported shelter renovations, expanded emergency apartments, expanded DV capacity. There's 2 new projects coming online this year, and there's more in the pipeline as well. The way that we fund emergency shelters is through something called the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. So I'm not going to talk about that program. This program is administered by our office, and I gave you 2 links. One is to the award list, so you can see who gets funding in your community, and the other is to the annual report from last year, and you can see the performance of this program. The HOP program, sometimes called the HOP program, it doesn't just fund emergency shelters. It's really more broadly, you can say, funding our housing crisis response system, right? Our community-based housing crisis response system. So just want to back up because I went a little bit deep into emergency housing because that's the crisis that we're in right now, right? But I want to back up a little bit and say, really, when we think about solving homelessness, there's 5 really important housing interventions at the highest level that we can bucket our housing interventions into, right? Preventing homelessness, financial assistance and services to prevent people from going into shelter or becoming unsheltered. There's all of the things I just talked about around emergency shelter and housing, right? That's another bucket. But there's also what we call rapid rehousing, which is some time-limited rental assistance and services to help people experiencing homelessness get into permanent housing and bridge to affordable housing. There's permanent supportive housing. You'll hear people talk about that. That's an evidence-based intervention that's really combining long-term services for people with the most severe service needs wrapped around them in affordable housing. And then there's all of the really important things that we do in Vermont to just make housing affordable to Vermonters, right? So we can think about what we're doing in terms of these broad interventions. Coordinated entry is the way that we agree in Vermont to help connect people who are experiencing housing crisis to help. It's the way that we all the state and our community partners all partner together. It's really about how we help people access resources, how we assess their needs, how we prioritize resources and refer them. It's meant to create sort of a really clear door for people to enter into the system. And you'll hear people talk about coordinated entry. It also gives us really important information about who's homeless in Vermont and what's happening. I put this slide in because if you know someone who's experiencing housing crisis in your community, if they need a safe, warm place to stay, call 211. If they have a safe, warm place to stay, but they need help, we made it really easy with coordinated entry. We said, here's the lead agency in the community that they can call. Not that this agency is going to solve all their problems, but they're going to help them get connected. So I want to make sure you all know who that is. And I said coordinated entry gives us important data, and that's really true. One of the things that we've seen happen is not just that the number of people experiencing homelessness has gone up, and that's not a static number. People come in and out of homelessness. Let me just be clear. We've helped rehouse over 3,000 people since March of 2020. 3,000 people experiencing homelessness that we've helped get into permanent housing. We collectively, that's pretty amazing. So it's not a static group of people experiencing homelessness. People come in and people come out. In fact, we know that a quarter to a third of people experiencing homelessness right now, it's the first time they've ever experienced homelessness, right? But we also know that people are homeless longer, right? This is a disturbing set of data and trend that we're seeing in terms of how long people are experiencing homelessness. I want to shift a little bit to focus on like what we're doing that's working well. You're going to hear a lot of stories today. I just want you to see, I can't talk all of this about all of this with you. We've done a lot of really great work during COVID. A lot of it's been funded with one-time federal funds, but not all of it. Some of it's been really important general fund investments and base increases. All of those investments weren't willy-nilly. They were a part of those 5 housing interventions, and they were part of this thing we call the 3 legs of the stool. This is this analogy that we love in this field, which is to solve homelessness, it takes 3 things. It takes units, it takes investments, capital investments to create units and expand access to units. It takes rental assistance to make that unit affordable for people, and it takes supportive services that are individualized and tailored to meet somebody's need, particularly employment and healthcare in the long term, right? So to solve homelessness, it's this 3 leg of the stool. It's not just that we need all of these, but if one of them's out of sync, you can't sit on the stool. It doesn't work. We need them to be in balance with each other. Right now, you'll hear a lot about number 1, unit. That's what's out of balance for us, right? But I think it's also important to know that there are other gaps in rental assistance and supportive services, and we need to think about investments in all 3. 3 things that we did specifically at DCF that I just want to highlight for you during the recovery that we learned a lot from that were really great things. One is we provided flexible funding for households to help them exit motels into safe housing. More than 1,100 households made use of those funds, supported a range of needs, not just the typical restrictive things, to just help people take down housing barriers. We've taken what we've learned from that and we've carried it forward into how we're doing financial assistance for households now. We also launched this program in partnership with the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity to provide a rapid rehousing voucher, right, a 12 to 18 months of rental assistance. And we helped 272 households exit homelessness into permanent housing. Most of them were able to get a permanent housing voucher, Section 8 voucher. That was a really important program that we did, and we're in the process of replicating that. I'll talk to you about that in a second. And the other is Reach Up. Right, we used emergency rental assistance dollars, almost 18 million in funds to help Reach Up households maintain housing stability. Other successes, we've learned on-site motel-based services really matter. AHS has leaned into this with some new care coordination teams. There's a BAA ask to support that, so I wanted to mention that. A lot of really great local collaboration and coordination. We're partnering with the Department of Health and community organizations around the state around how we expand healthcare access for people experiencing homelessness. That's really awesome work we're doing to move the needle on that. Some statewide collaboration and coordination. So AHS meets regularly with the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, the Vermont State Housing Authority, the Vermont Housing Finance Agencies, a lot of acronyms, right? All of those big state players in this housing work. We get together all the time to coordinate and collaborate. That's been a really important thing that's come out of COVID. And then we've also made big increases in housing services and rental assistance, and a lot of work that the legislature has supported to expand access and create access to units. So I'm not going to go through those, but wanted to name that that's been a really important part of our strategy. So we didn't stop there. In October, we actually met DCF, specifically hosted meetings with our local homeless coalitions to talk about what next, because there's been a huge amount of federal funding that's winding down, right? So we wanted to engage with them in a conversation around what's next, where are the biggest gaps, where do we need to be moving forward. I'm not going to talk through that work, but I gave you a link to the summary, and I really encourage you to read the summary of that. And you can see we spoke with more than 300 people, more than 100 organizations, and they provided some really important insight on how to move forward. So finally, looking forward, these are some things on the horizon I just want to call your attention to. We need to really focus on preventing homelessness, right? In this tight housing market, that has to be a fundamental housing strategy for us. It's actually a really important part of the federal plan to prevent and address homelessness, preventing homelessness, and some important strategies on that. So 2 things on the horizon right now. We've just added another $500 million to the Housing Opportunity Grant Program to give more funding out there in communities to help people who fall behind on their rent to access resources, right? We also are expanding the Vermont Rental Subsidy Program to make sure reach-up families can maintain their housing. That CARES housing voucher program I talked about, we rehoused almost 300 families. We're replicating that. So we just launched that, the Home Family Housing Voucher Program. We want every family in Vermont experiencing homelessness to have a rental assistance voucher that can help them get into housing and bridge to affordable housing. So this project is helping 100 families. We just launched it again with Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity. And there's a $3 million BAA ask to expand this to help another 150 families. The Landlord Relief Program, with funds appropriated from the legislature last year, is finally launching the Vermont State Housing Authority. This is a statewide rental risk pool. A lot of private landlords, whether it's real or perceived risks, are hesitant to rent to people who maybe don't have a rental history or poor rental history. This is a really important tool in our toolbox that's going to launch next month. And then finally, we need to address zoning and permitting barriers to, I would say, to affordable housing, right? But you're seeing me highlight in particular to emergency shelters. So I'll leave you with that. We've got a lot of great folks today to really shed more light on the situation, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. I can envision having you back relatively soon with the exact same slideshow. And so committees, I would utilize the links that Sarah provided as information, but there are a lot of questions to ask about status and what we're working on, but we'll come back to you soon.
Excellent. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Clara Casey, the Director of Economic Empowerment from the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. She is also the co-chair of Coalition to End Homelessness. Welcome.
Thank you. Great. So for the record, my name is Clara Casey. As the chair said, I am the Director of Economic Empowerment at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. I've been asked here today to just kind of cue up our testimony. So thank you for letting us speak today at Homelessness Awareness Day. The Vermont Network, just a quick introduction, we are a statewide domestic and sexual violence coalition. We have 15 member organizations that work in every county, in every town in Vermont to support survivors. I would like to just bring up the reason that I am here doing housing work, and it's because if you talk with advocates in your community or survivors, you will inevitably hear that housing is one of the greatest barriers that they face in attaining safety. So that's why I'm here doing housing work, and that's why I am on the board, the chair of the board of the Coalition to End Homelessness. The Coalition to End Homelessness is a nonprofit organization that seeks to ensure that people living in Vermont have a safe, stable, and affordable home. And if homelessness does occur, it is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And those experiencing homelessness are treated with dignity and respect. And Sarah mentioned the HUD Continuum of Care. So we support the Balance of State HUD Continuum of Care, and the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance supports the Continuum of Care that covers Chittenden County. Together, we do some of the work that Sarah mentioned around the coordinated entry system. The point in time count is coordinated through the Continuums of Care. And we also host Homelessness Awareness Day. And I would just like to mention our partners today. So the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition is sponsoring today as well. We recognize that without homes, we cannot prevent or end homelessness. And you'll hear as Sarah mentioned, a lot about that today and the challenges around that. We also have Vermont Interfaith Action here with us today sponsoring our event. And we know that faith leaders, state agencies, healthcare organizations, hospitals, businesses, these are all partners that we cannot do our work without. So it takes everyone in our communities to address and end homelessness. Today we have lined up testimony. We hope to highlight three things. So one is who is in your community, the stories of the people in your community that are experiencing homelessness or have experienced homelessness. What is being done right now, what is working, and what we hope for the future. And we are here today in the State House, but we've also lined up events happening all around the state. At the bottom of my testimony, I included a link on our website, helpingtohousevt.org, and you can check out what's being done in your community today. Some folks had events earlier in the winter, but just highlighting in your communities that these are folks that you know, these are family, friends, neighbors. And there will also be an event taking place. Some folks may have seen a display on the State House steps today from the Washington County group, and there will be a bit of a speak out today at noon on the steps if you would like to come and check that out. So finally, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting us here today. My work at the network, I focus on economic justice, and I'm on our policy team. So just know that I am here. If you are working on, of course, issues of housing, but anything that relates to survivors of domestic and sexual violence that you feel you want to connect with us about, I'm a resource for you. I pulled out my cards that I had, my new cards I had made up in 2020 that I haven't gotten to use yet, so I'm going to leave a stack of them. I couldn't find my fancy name tag, but we'll leave those here for you. And I hope to definitely come in and talk to you again about the issues that are important to us that impact the most vulnerable Vermonters. And just that's my queuing up the rest of these folks for the day. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
So some witnesses are here. Some witnesses are right here. So,
Okay.
good morning. Are you Colby?
I am Colby.
Well, Colby, welcome to our committee. We are also sharing your testimony today with the committee upstairs via Zoom. So upstairs in the Human Services Committee, they're just behind you on the screen, but they're listening into your testimony this morning as well. So this is the House General and Housing Committee, and we're here to hear you. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. My name is Colby Lynch, and I currently live at the Quality Inn in Barry. First, I'd like to give a bit of background information on exactly how my partner and I found ourselves living in a hotel room. When the pandemic began, we were both home care providers. Tyler had been working with an agency out of Moortown for over a decade. He was great at the job of caregiving, and I was relatively new, though my background as a single parent prepared me well. All was going smoothly with work. However, our living situation became a precarious one. The owner of the house we were renting, to the tune of $1,600 per month, had plans to sell the property and needed to fix it up. I was hoping that we could continue staying there through this transition, but that was not the case. We had been given a notice to vacate within 3 months. At the time, we didn't really think it was that big of a deal, other than the arduous task of moving our belongings during mud season. We secured a room through Front Porch Forum and moved in at the beginning of May 2021. Despite our desire to make the living situation work, we recognized that we had to leave what had become an unhealthy living situation. By that time, it was the height of the housing crisis, and there were no options available, no matter how much money you made. So we found ourselves living in our van. When you are living in a vehicle and the temperatures are getting down to 28 degrees, it is a life-changing experience, one I have still not fully recovered from. We moved into the hotel room on November 4th, 2021. We were just glad to be somewhere warm and not living in our vehicles. But I want to stress the reality that motel rooms are for vacations or weekend excursions, not everyday life. For example, I am grateful for the lady who reached out when I posted our story on the Hunger Mountain Co-op Community Board. She allowed me to use her camp stove so I could boil some water and correctly put away my garden goods for the winter. I used to take pride in the ability to grow food and can it properly. When I had a kitchen, I was quite the entertainer with elaborate meals that were the outcome of my garden growing ventures. I don't get to entertain much these days. In the motel room, we have a microwave and a one-pot coffee maker. The set of drawers to keep our clothing in were all busted before we moved in. I keep my clothing in the armoire and in laundry baskets stacked up on top of each other. It is quite the ordeal to put together a simple matching outfit sometimes. These days I work with the public, waiting tables and bartending. Wearing dirty, ill-fitting, or damaged clothes is not a good look when you have this sort of job. I could go on, but my main message is this. If there were housing units available, then we would be in one right now. Vermont has no housing safety net. We had to switch careers because if we make even $60 more than what we currently make at low-wage jobs, we would not be able to stay at the hotel. But this is a chicken and egg situation. Even if we find housing, we have to show that we can afford it. But we can't secure more lucrative income sources because if we do, we are kicked out of our current situation and would be homeless again. We see signs that everywhere is hiring, but having no rooms available to rent is impacting folks' ability to apply for these jobs. If this great need for unavailable housing persists, Vermont will lose a lot of good workers. It is comforting to know that there are those in public office that truly do care. That being said, I shouldn't have to feel like I'm violating community standards just by simply existing. These days, the weariness of the situation has my spirits draining rapidly. I know that I'm physically and mentally a strong individual capable of a lot of good. I'm a mother to a grown boy, a visionary artist, and a worthy confidant. I enjoy a good laugh even at the expense of myself, but having no place to live is no laughing matter. The debasing stereotypes towards the homeless need to be eradicated from public dissent. Perhaps a day will come when I can look back and chuckle at the desperation behind emptying my middle-aged bladder in a Fahe yogurt container in the dead of the early morning, freezing my behind off in the car because the water pump in the van went out again. Or waiting in anticipation for the dreaded cop knock on the van window, assaulting my precious sleep just to make sure everything is okay. A day will come when I'm able to stretch out on my own couch again or have access to a table to do my art in my own space or cook in my own kitchen so I can entertain friends and family at my dinner table. A situation such as this can be debasing and destabilizing. I'm thankful that I can choose for it not to be demoralizing. I have met a few friends at the motel. Grit and candor, and I like to think wisdom, has pulled me through this experience thus far. I only wish to use my testimony as a way of addressing the issues, acting, and moving forward. The words of Eleanor Roosevelt have become clear to me in these chaotic times. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I will end on this note.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Colby has also written more of her story in a pamphlet. She does have some that she can leave, and we can also email Ron the full packet, as well as a copy of the testimony, which is just excerpts from that full document. So.
Leave us at least a couple of the hard copies.
Yeah, just a couple.
Okay, so like 3, 5?
Why don't we do 3? Because I know there's some folks on committee who prefer hard copies, but I also want to make sure that you have some. If it's electronic, we can access it there. If you send all of that stuff
I'll send that to
then
you.
we would appreciate it to have it on the record and have access to it when we would like to read it again.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
sharing your
much.
story, sharing your time.
Thank Rep. Stevens.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate, it'd be helpful if the witnesses do have something in writing, if they could email it, and then that would be helpful so we can review it as
They
well.
want hard copies that we can take a couple upstairs to them.
Sure. Did you hear that, Representative Wood?
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Okay, we'll bring a couple up, Representative Wood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colby.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have
So much.
Rick DeAngelis, who is the Executive Director of the Good Samaritan Haven. Welcome back, Rick. And
Yeah, good to be here.
3D.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Rick DeAngelis, the co-director of the Good Samaritan Haven, or we're called Good Sam for short. We provide shelter and services for individual adults experiencing homelessness in Washington County. And my job here today is just to share some of what we've learned in providing these services, what we've learned about people experiencing homelessness. But first, I want to give you just a little bit of background about Good Samaritan Haven. Over 30 years ago, Good Sam was established and initially operated by volunteers, many from faith area communities. And still today, volunteers and the support of the local community is critical to us providing our services. The goal was to provide shelter to a significant but small number of unsheltered persons in the Barre-Montpelier area and to treat sheltered guests with dignity and respect. Over the years, the need for shelter and related services steadily grew in Washington County. We squeezed more beds into our very modest shelter building, a single-family house, and we used church basements during the coldest winter months. As we all know, a dramatic surge in the number of homelessness occurred in 2020 and 21 with the onset of COVID. It challenged us as an organization to develop more shelter beds. We now operate 3 year-round shelters. We provide services in the area motels. We offer street outreach, and we also operate a COVID testing and vaccination program for people who are experiencing homelessness. Over the last 3 years, the number of individuals experiencing homelessness in Washington County has fluctuated between 350 and 450 people a night. And these are folks in motels, shelters, and on the streets. And the rate of homelessness, it's really mind-blowing. For Washington County, we only have a population of 59,000 people. That's 72 homeless individuals per 10,000, which if you look at the national figures, it's astronomically high compared to many other communities. So who are the individuals experiencing homelessness here in Washington County? Well, tragically, about 20% of them are children living now in a motel with a parent. Altogether, about 10% of the households experiencing homelessness are families with children. About 70% are adults who either are by themselves or in some few cases, they may be with a partner. And this is the population that we work with. We serve adult individuals in our shelters at the Hilltop or on the streets. Each of these individuals, of course, is unique. You heard Colby's story. Each and every one of them has their own unique path and story to tell. However, there are some striking characteristics and trends that I want to share with you that I think we need to consider as we go forward working on this problem. Number one, almost 80% of our shelter guests report having a disabling mental health condition. Now, these numbers are self-reported. This isn't a diagnosis by a clinician. We don't know the nature of the condition, but just the high number of people reporting that, it indicates how much people are suffering. In the last 2 weeks at our new 31-bed shelter, it's called the Welcome Center. It's former Twin City Motel on the Barre-Montpelier Road. We had 2 of our guests that had to be hospitalized because of suicidal ideation. Secondly, 1/3 of our shelter guests reported alcohol or drug abuse as a disabling condition. It is a constant challenge to keep our guests and staff safe in an environment that has widespread abuse of substances. We need more recovery-oriented options for folks. There just aren't enough. Thirdly, amazingly, there are a growing number of older persons experiencing homelessness in central Vermont and nationally. This is a trend all over the country. Since opening the Welcome Center with 31 beds in July, over 1/3 of our guests have been over 60 years old. At the Hilltop Inn Motel with 60 guests, about 1/4 of the guests are over 60 years of age. Many of these individuals have serious healthcare concerns, including compromised mobility, respiratory conditions, and dementia. The streets or a shelter is a difficult place to be if you're growing older. My fourth point, the number of individuals living on the streets, the unsheltered homeless or rough sleepers, has risen dramatically in recent years in Washington County and nationally. I was a little bit, but not completely surprised to find someone sleeping this morning under the portico in the front of the State House. That has become more the norm than the exception. So in September, we counted 86 unsheltered homeless in our region, Washington County. The rough sleepers are more likely to have significant physical, behavioral, and mental health challenges. Many are challenging to safely house in emergency shelters. We need a more refined strategy for helping them. My last point is, we've observed at Good Sam that most of our guests have limited or non-existent support systems of family and friends. They're alone. Homelessness for them is a great loneliness. Like all of us, they need friendship, community, and connection. As I think about this, I recall the famous phrase from the Lawrence mill worker strike of 1912, bread for all and roses too. What I mean is, let's find a solution to homelessness that supports each person's heart and dignity, as well as their housing and service needs. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for sharing an update. And again, we'll see you back here.
Okay.
Soon enough. Committee and witnesses, we're going to take a 7-minute break till 10 after 10, and we'll be back. And for those who have to testify down in the Senate, starting at 10:45, we'll try to get everybody out on that time, but we'll keep managing the list. So.